Sri Arvindo. I welcome to Diganta Biswa Sarma ji.
Namaskar. Professor Srinivas Bharkedi ji, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Central Sanskrit University, New Delhi. Professor Dr. Sampanananda Mishra sir, my teacher. Dr. Gopal Joyraman, Regional Director, Indira Gandhi National Center of Arts, Regional Center, Puducherry. Dr. KTV Raghavan, Research Officer, Indira Gandhi National Center of Arts, Regional Center, Puducherry. My co-speaker, Gitanjali, and esteemed participants. Let me clarify. I am perfectly aware of my limitation and shortcomings. I am a scholar who possesses any scholarship. My shraddha and a sense of offering anything and everything at the lotus feet of the Supreme Divine Mother is the sole source of my strength and audacity. Rest entirely belong to and depend on her. This is actually a part of my sadhana and an offering at the lotus feet of Sri Aurobindo in this auspicious year of his sesquicentenary of birth, celebrated across the globe. So today's my topic is a glimpse of Avatar Krishna, not Bhagavad Gita in the light of Sri Aurobindo. My topic is a glimpse of Avatar Krishna in the light of Sri Aurobindo's essays on the Gita. So who is Krishna? Krishna means the Avatar Krishna, the Krishna of the Gita, the transcendent Godhead, Paramatma, Parambrahma, Purushottama, the cosmic deity, master of the universe, Vasudeva, the immanent in the heart of all creatures. He was incarnate at Vrindavan, Dwaraka, and Kurukshetra. First, let us have a look at Sri Aurobindo's essays on the Gita. Essays on the Gita is Sri Aurobindo's exposition on the Gita. Neither scholastic nor academic scrutiny of its thought is his object of studying the Gita. Sri Aurobindo approaches the Gita for help and light, and his aim is to distinguish its essential and living message that in it, on which humanity has to seize for its perfection and its highest spiritual welfare. Essays on the Gita necessarily covers the whole Gita. Yet, it is not exactly a verse-by-verse exposition of the Gita. Rather, Essays on the Gita is a thematic commentary of the Gita. It has two series, each containing 24 themes or chapters. Essays on the Gita is a classic by itself, though neither pedantic nor similar to scholastic exposition. One finds in it a profound vision, a veritable revelation of the truth of the Gita. To enter into the Gita in the light of Sri Aurobindo is, as it were, to receive the Gita's message straight from the divine teacher, says the writer H. Maheshwari. Sri Aurobindo's own relation with the Gita is indeed a unique one. Sri Aurobindo had few remarkable experiences of the divine while he was in Alipur jail during the period from 1908 to 1909 as an under-trial prisoner in connection with Alipur bomb conspiracy case, which he reveals in his famous Uttarpara speech in 1909 as follows. Let me quote, "He placed the Gita in my hands," referring to Krishna. "He placed the Gita in my hands. His strength entered into me, and I was able to do the sadhana of the Gita. I was not only to understand intellectually, but to realize what Sri Krishna demanded of Arjuna and what he demands of those who aspire to do his work. to be free from repulsion and desire, to do work for him without the demand for fruit, to renounce self-will and become a passive and faithful instrument in his hands, to have an equal heart for high and low, friend and opponent, success and failure, yet not to do his work negligently. Unquote. This was Sri Aurobindo's own realization of the spiritual ideals of the Gita. Afterwards, he had the highest divine vision termed Vasudeva Darshana. This was the realization of the cosmic consciousness, that is to say, of the divine as all beings and all that is. Vasudevam Sarvam Miti, says Sri Aurobindo himself. He describes the realization in his Uttarpara speech as follows. Let me quote, his strength again entered into me. I looked at the veil that secluded me from man, and it was no longer by its high walls that I was imprisoned. No, it was Vasudeva who surrounded me. I would under the branches of the tree in front of my cell, but it was not the tree. I knew it was Vasudeva. It was Sri Krishna whom I saw standing there and holding over me his shade. I looked at the bars of my cell, the very grating that did duty for a door, and again I saw Vasudeva. It was Narayana who was guarding and standing sentry over me, or I lay on the coarse blankets that were given me for a couch and felt the arms of Sri Krishna around me, the arms of my friend and lover. This was the first use of the deeper vision he gave me. I looked at the prisoners in the jail, the thieves, the murderers, the swindlers, and as I looked at them, I saw Vasudeva. It was Narayana, whom I found in these darkened souls and misused bodies. Unquote. This verse, that is to say, Vasudevam Sarvam Miti of the Gita is one of the master conception with regard to its vision of avatarhood, on which we shall be deliberating upon after a while. With this realization, Sri Aurobindo began to write two series of the essays on the Gita, each containing 24 essays during the year 1906 to 1920. The Gita was given to the seeking soul of heroic warriors in crisis, the human disciple Arjuna by his comrade and charioteer Krishna, the divine teacher of the battlefield of Kurukshetra. It was in fact a colloquy took place between Arjuna and Krishna. Sri Aurobindo speaks of this conversation as one of the greatest events in the world history, which in his words, let me quote, will yet liberate humanity. The mother says, explaining the significance of Sri Aurobindo's aphoristic utterance as follows. Let me quote mother. Sri Aurobindo considers the message of the Gita to be the basis of the great spiritual movement which has led and will lead humanity more and more to its liberation. That is to say, to its escape from falsehood and ignorance towards the truth. From the time of its first appearance, the Gita had an immense spiritual action, but with the new interpretation that Sri Aurobindo has given to it, its influence has increased considerably and has become decisive. Unquote. Now, then who is divine? Who is divine? Can we call the Gita an autobiographical declaration of the Supreme? I just leave it to you to reflect on. Let us first have a look at what Krishna has spoken about himself in some of the verses of the Gita, apart from his declaration of his own vibhutis in chapter 10. First, from chapter 5, verse number 29. The blessed Lord says, Bhoktarang Jagyatapasang, that is to say, knowing me, the enjoyer of sacrifice and tapasya, then Suhridang Sarvabhutanang, knowing me the friends of all creatures. Sarvaloka Maheswaram, knowing me the mighty Lord of all the world. Then again, chapter number 10, verse number 3, Loka Maheswaram. Sri Krishna has spoken about himself as the Loka Maheswaram, the great Lord of the worlds. Then in chapter number 7, verse number 30, verse number 19, he has spoken about himself as the Vasudeva Sarvamiti. Vasudeva Sarvamiti. That Vasudeva, the immanent divine, is all that is. Then in again chapter number 7, verse number 10, he has spoken about himself as the Bijang Mang Sarvabhutanang. Bijang Mang Sarvabhutanang. Know me to be the eternal seed of all existences. Eternal seed of all existence. Then he says in the same verse, Buddhi Buddhi Matam Ashmi. Buddhi Buddhi Matam Ashmi. I am intelligence of the intelligent, wisdom of the wise. Then in the same verse, he has spoken about himself as the Tejo Tejosinam. Tejo Tejosinam. Verily am I the energy and splendor of the puissant and splendid. Then in verse number 39 of the chapter 10, he has spoken about himself again as the Yat Shrapi Sarvabhutanang Bijang Tat Aham Arjuna. Whatever then is the seed of all the existence that I am. Then in verse number 8, chapter 10, he has spoken about himself as the Aham Sarvasya Prabhu. Aham Sarvasya Prabhu. I am the birth of everything. Then in the same verse he says, Matta Sarvang Pravartate. Matta Sarvang Pravartate. From me all proceeds. From me all proceeds. Then in verse number 20, chapter 10, he says that Ahamatma Sarvabhuta Sayastita. Ahamatma Sarvabhuta Sayastita. I am the self, O Gurakesha, abiding in the heart of all beings. Then he has again says, Ahamadisha Madhangsha Bhutanamanta Evasha. I am the beginning, the middle, and also the end of all beings. Then in verse number 17, chapter number 9, he says about himself as the Pitahamasya Jagatu Mata Dhata Pitamaha. I am the father of this universe, the mother, the providence, the ancestor. Then followed by again, Veddam Pravitramunka Rika Sama Jajurebasha. I am the knowable, the sacred syllable Om, and the Rig, Sama, and Joju. Then in verse number 15 of the chapter 15, he says about himself as the Sarvasya Sahang Hridi Sangnivishtu. I am seated in the heart of all. I am seated in the heart of all. Then in the same verse he says, Matta Smiti Gyanam Apuhanam Sa. From me are memory and knowledge and the resolving debates of the reason. Again he says in the same verse, Vedaisha Sarvai Aham Eva Vedda. I am verily the one to be known by all the Vedas. Then Vedanta Krita Vedabita Evasha Aham, the author of Vedanta and the knower of the Veda also am I. Then in verse number 61, he says, Ishara Sarvabhutanang Riddese Arjuna Tishtati Brahmayan Sarvabhutani Jantrarurani Mayaya. In the heart of all existences abides the Lord. O Arjuna, turning all the beings by his Maya, as if mounted on a machine. Then in verse number 18, chapter number 15, he says, Yasmat Kharam Atita, Yasmat Kharam Atita, Aham Akharatapi Sa Uttama, Atah Ashmi Loke Vede Sa Pratita Purushuttama. Since I transcend the Khara and am the highest, even the Akshara, hence am I celebrated as the Purushuttama in the world and in the Veda. The Gita has referred to inner divinity as many as or more than 11 verses. The blessed Lord has spoken about himself as the inner divinity in verse number 29, 30, and 31 of chapter 6. Again, he refers to inner divinity in chapter number 9, verse number 11, chapter number 9, verse number 29. Again, he refers to that inner divinity in the verse number 11 and 20 of the chapter number 10. Then again in verse number 14 and 15 of the chapter number 15, again he refers to inner divinity in verse number 18 of the chapter 16. Then in verse number 6 of the chapter number 17, and lastly in verse number 61, chapter number 18. So almost 12, I have found almost 12 verses referring to inner divinity. Then in verse number 32 of the chapter 11, that is the Vishwarupa Darshana. After the Vishwarupa Darshana, the God has spoken about himself as the Kala Asmi Loka Khayakrita Prabridha. As the Kala Asmi Loka Khayakrita Prabridha Lokan Samahartum Iha Prabridha. I am Kala, huge risen for the destruction of the world, intent on devouring the peoples here as my will in my workings. Then in verse number 33, he has said, I have killed them all. You become only my occasion. So moeibate nihata purvameva nimitta matrang bhavasagvasasin. By me, verily, are all these already slain. Do thou become the occasion only, O Sadvasasin. So he is the supreme doer, not we. We are not the doer, not even the Prakriti. He is the supreme doer. Moeibate nihata purvameva nimitta matrang bhavasadvasasin. Then in verse number 7 of chapter 15, who are we? Then who are we? The blessed Lord has said that Mamoi Bangshu Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. It is verily an eternal portion of me that becomes the Jiva in the world of Jivas. So we are what we are. What are we? We are Mama Eva Angsha Sanatana. We are Mamoi Bangshu Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. Then in verse number 18, chapter number 9, the blessed Lord has spoken about himself as the Gotiri Bharta Prabhu, Sakhi Nivasa Saranang Suhrit, Prabhava Pralaya Snanang Nidhanang Bijam Abbayam. That is to say, the path and the goal, the sustainer, the all-pervading master, the witness, the abode, the refuse, the loving friend, the emergence, the dissolution, the status, the all-containing substratum, the imperishable seed, all am I. Then, in verse number 13, chapter number 9, he has spoken about himself as the Bhutadim Abbayam, Bhuta Adim Abbayam, as. So knowing me as the imperishable source, Bhuta Adim Abbayam. Then in verse number 24, chapter 9, he has spoken about himself as the Aham hi sarvajagyanam. Aham hi sarvajagyanam bhukta sa prabhu eva sa. I myself am the Lord and enjoyer of all sacrifices. And verse number 5, chapter 7, he says that apara yam itah tu annam prakritim vidhi me param. This is lower. No to my other nature different from these. So he has spoken about his para prakriti. So jiva bhutam mahabahu iya idam tharyate jagata. O Mahabahu, the supreme which becomes the jiva and by which this world is upheld. Then in verse number 6 of the chapter 7, he have spoken about himself as the womb of this universe. So yatat unini bhutani sarvani iti upadharaya. Understand that this is the womb of all beings. So para prakriti is the womb of all beings. Then aham kritanasya jagatoh prabhava pralayah tatha. I am the origin of the whole world, and so too its dissolution. So this is all about, all about Krishna. He has himself spoken about in the Gita, apart from his vibhutis, which he has spoken in chapter 10. So this is some of the verses where he has spoken about himself. Then Avatar Krishna in the light of Sri Aurobindo's essay on the Gita. So Maharishi at the very outset has said that India has from ancient times held strongly a belief. Belief in what? Belief in the reality of the Avatara. A belief in the reality of the Avatara. And what is the meaning of Avatara? First initial meeting he has given us as the descent into form. The descent into form, the revelation of the Godhead in humanity. So India has from ancient times held strongly a belief in the reality of the Avatara. And what is the meaning of Avatara? The descent into form, the revelation of the Godhead in humanity. So descent into form, revelation of the Godhead in humanity. These four elements are to be noted. But Maharishi has spoken that in the West, this belief has never really stamped itself upon the mind of the people. Why? Why it never really stamped itself upon the mind of the people? Because in the West, it has been presented, that is the avatarahood has been presented through the exoteric Christianity, as a theological dogma, without any roots in the reason and general consciousness and attitude towards life. So in the West, no stamp upon the mind. Avatarahood had no stamp upon the mind. Why? Because it is presented there through exoteric Christianity. And how? As a theological dogma, without any root in the reason and general consciousness and attitude towards life. So then, what is the case? What is the case with India then? Then Maharishi says, but in India, it has grown up. That is to say, the avatarahood has grown up and persisted as a logical outcome of the Vedantic view of life. As a logical outcome of the Vedantic view. And taken firm root in the consciousness of the race. And what is that Vedantic view of life? We will be discussing. So, first point of difference between the avatarahood in West and India is avatarahood in West is just a exoteric presentation of theological dogma without any root in the reason, general consciousness and attitude towards life. But in India, it has grown up and persisted as a logical outcome of the Vedantic view of life. And taken firm root in the consciousness of the race. Then what is that Vedantic view of life which has taken firm root in the consciousness of the race? What is that Vedantic view of life? Maharishi says, all existence is a manifestation of God. So what is that Vedantic view of life? All existence is a manifestation of God. Because He is the only existence. Vasudevam sarvam iti. Sarvam khalvidam Brahman. All is Brahman. Upanishad says. Gita says, Vasudevam Sarvam Iti. So all existence is a manifestation of God. Why? All existence is manifestation of God? Because He is the only existence. He is the only existence. And nothing can be except as either a real figuring or else a figment of that one reality. Either sought or asought. So nothing can be because He is the only existence. So entire existence is the manifestation of God. This is the Vedantic view of life. So six facts to be noted here. All existence a manifestation of God. He is the only existence. Number third, nothing can be except as either a real figuring, that is to say sought, or a figment, also capricious product of the mind of that one reality. So these six facts to be noted. So in India, avatarhood has grown up as the logical outcome of the Vedantic view of life. That is to say, the all existence is a manifestation of life because He is the only existence. And nothing can be. And therefore, Maharishi says, every conscious being in part or in some way, either in part or in some way, a descent of the infinite. We are all descent of the infinite because all existence is a manifestation of divine, manifestation of God. So we are all descent. We are all descent. And descent means avatara. We are all descent. We are all descent of the infinite. But who are we? Gita has spoken about the Zibo as the Mama Eva Angsa Sanatana, my portion eternal. So therefore, every conscious being is in part or in some way a descent of the infinite. And what is the meaning of descent? What is the meaning of descent? Into the apparent finiteness of name and form. So descent into the name and form. And name and form means the finiteness. Descent of the infinite into the apparent finiteness. Descent of the infinite, but into the apparent finiteness. Why? Nothing can be. All existence is manifestation of God. This is the Vedantic view of life. So from that point of view, we are all descent of that infinite. So 5 elements to be noted here. Every conscious being is a descent, either in part or in some way. Number 3, a descent of the infinite. Number 4, into the apparent finiteness, and apparent finiteness of name and form. This existence, this manifestation is called the manifestation of name and form. But then Maharishi has said the third new thing. But it is a veiled manifestation. It is veiled manifestation. Why veil? Because we are not aware of our divine source. Because we are not aware of our divine source. And also the fourth fact that there is a gradation. Though we are all descent, but there is a gradation between the supreme being of the divine and the consciousness shrouded partly or wholly by ignorance of self. And because we are shrouded by ignorance, so our real self is shrouded by ignorance. That is why I call it is a veiled manifestation. It is a veiled manifestation. Though we are all descent of the infinite, but there is a gradation between the supreme being of the divine and the consciousness shrouded partly or wholly by ignorance of self, referring to Zibo. So the Zibo are consciousness shrouded partly or wholly by ignorance of self in the finite. So a veiled manifestation, graded manifestation, gradation, and the gradation between supreme being divine and the consciousness shrouded partly or wholly by ignorance of self in the finite. And that supreme being of the divine is called Parabhava. So Parabhava is the first element, Parabhava, supreme being of the divine. So it's a gradation. So what is the second? Then the conscious embodied soul. So after the Parabhava, it is the conscious embodied soul. And conscious embodied soul is called Dehi. We are all decent, but first one is supreme being, that is to say the Parabhava, then the conscious embodied soul. Conscious embodied soul. And conscious embodied soul is called Dehi. So after Parabhava, it is the Dehi. And what is this conscious embodied soul? It is nothing but the spark of the divine fire. Nothing but the spark of the divine fire. And this is also known as the soul in man. And what this soul does? The soul opens out to self-knowledge. The soul opens out to self-knowledge in due course of time. And then what happens? Then it develops out of ignorance. Then it develops out of ignorance of self into self-being. So 5 elements, that the jivas are the conscious embodied soul. That is to say, the Dehi. They are called in Sanskrit Dehi. So after Parabhava, it is the Dehi, spark of the divine fire. And Dehis are nothing but the sparks of the divine fire. Number 3rd element, soul opening out to self-knowledge in due course of time. Number 4th, as it develops out of ignorance of self into self-being. So this is the outcome when the soul in man opens out to self-knowledge. Then the soul develops out of ignorance of self into self-being. Then Maharishi says another form of manifestation, which is called Vibhuti. So first is the Parabhava, then the Dehi. He has not yet spoken about the Avatara. So first he has spoken about the Parabhava, then the Dehi, now he has spoken about the Vibhuti. And what is the Vibhuti? So then Maharishi says, the divine also is revealed ordinarily. Ordinarily by how? By pouring itself into forms of the cosmic existence. By pouring itself. But what is the process? But how? In an efflorescence of its power. Efflorescence of power means in the fullness of manifestation. Efflorescence means the fullness of manifestation. So Dehi is one form of manifestation. First one is the Parabhava, supreme being. Then now Vibhuti. What is Vibhuti? The divine also is revealed ordinarily by pouring itself into the forms of the cosmic existence in an efflorescence of its power. Efflorescence means fullness of manifestation in energies and magnitude of its knowledge, love, joy, developed force of being. But maybe in degrees or phases. Phases mean external forms, in external forms. And the divine has spoken about his own vibhutis in chapter number 10 from verse number 19 to 42. Verse number 19 to 42. So we are all decent. All existence is the manifestation of the divine because he is the only existence. But it is a veiled manifestation, and also there is gradation in its manifestation. First is the Parabhava, then the Dehi, and third one is the Vibhuti. Then now Maharishi, he has now spoken about Avatar. Who is Avatara? Who is Avatara? Then Maharishi says that but when the divine consciousness and power, when the divine consciousness and power taking upon itself, what is itself? The human form and the human mode of action. So divine consciousness and power taking upon itself the human form and the human mode of action. So divine consciousness taking human form and the human mode of action. And possessing it means possessing that human form and the human mode of action. How? Possessing it not only by powers and magnitude, because when it is being possessed by the powers and magnitude, then it is called vibhuti. But now in case of avatara, Maharishi says, possessing it not only by the powers and magnitude. Powers and magnitude are there, but not only by powers and magnitude. Not only by degrees and outward passes of itself, but out of its eternal self-knowledge. But out of its eternal self-knowledge. And when the unborn knows itself, when the unborn knows itself and acts in the frame of the mental being and the appearance of birth, that is the height of the conditioned manifestation. It is the full and conscious descent of the Godhead. Why it is called conditioned manifestation? Because the birth in the finite, birth in the finite, birth in the finite, birth in the appearance, so manifestation in the appearance of birth. So there are certain facts to be noted here. So it is not embodied conscious soul. It is not vibhutis. It is avatara. And what are the conditions? That divine consciousness and power. Directly the divine consciousness and power. Taking on human form and the human mode of action. So second thing to be noted is human form and the human mode of action. So divine consciousness and power taking upon itself the human form and the human mode of action. But possession, not only by the power and magnitude and by the degrees and outward phases of itself, because that is the case with the vibhutis. So not only that is there, but not only possessing, not only by the power and magnitude, by degree and outward phases of itself, but out of its eternal self-knowledge. Because what we have discussed earlier, but this is a veiled manifestation. But in case of avatara, it is not a veiled manifestation, because it is a manifestation out of its eternal self-knowledge. And then what happens? Then the unborn knows itself. It is no longer than a veiled manifestation. When the unborn knows itself, acts in the frame of the mental being and the appearance of birth. And that is the height of the conditioned manifestation. Why is it called conditioned manifestation? Because manifestation in the appearance of birth, it is the appearance in the finite and of this world, of this existence. So the difference between, in case of vibhuti, it is the human form and the human mode of action possessing on itself. In case of avatara, not only by the power and magnitude, by the degrees of outward phases of itself, but out of its eternal self-knowledge. When the unborn knows itself, acts in the frame of the mental being and the appearance of birth. This is the height of the conditioned manifestation. It is the full and conscious descent of the Godhead. So this is called the conscious, and it is the full and conscious descent of the Godhead. So Maharishi has so he has spoken about these three forms of manifestation. First one is Dehi, then the Vibhuti, then the Avatara. Avatara is also Vibhuti. So Avatara is also Vibhuti. Then now he is bringing in a different element. perhaps a noble element, a noble thing in the concept of avatarahood. And what is that concept? It is the eternal avatara. He has spoken about eternal avatara. What is that eternal avatara? So, so now let us discuss that. Then Maharishi says that the Vaishnava form of Vedantism has spoken about relation of God in man and the man in God. So what is the Vaishnava form of Vedantism? Vaishnava form of Vedantism has laid most stress upon the conception of relation of God in man and man in God. So double figure of Naranarayana. It is the conception of the Vaishnava form of Vedantism, relation between man in God and God in man. So it is the double figure of Nara and Narayana. Nara and Narayana. And who is Nara? Nara is the human soul. Nara is the human soul. Eternal companion of the divine. Nara is the human soul and the eternal companion of the divine. Eternal companion of the divine. Finds itself only when it awakens to that companionship and begins, as the Gita would say, to live in God. So when awakened to that companionship, when Nara is awakened to that companionship, then according to Gita, this is the living in God. This is the living in God. So who is Nara? Nara is the human soul. Nara is the human soul, the eternal companion of the divine, but the Nara is unaware of this fact. When Nara becomes aware of this fact, when Nara is awakened to that companionship, and then begins, according to Gita, what is called living in the God. So Nara is the human soul, eternal companion of the divine, and when Nara is awakened to that companionship, it begins to live in God. It begins to live in God. Then who is Narayana? Who is Narayana? Narayana first is the supreme uplifting of Dehi. So Bhagavat Atma. So Narayana is the divine soul. Narayana is the divine soul. And that divine soul always present in our humanity. And Gita has refers to this inner divinity, which I have already mentioned, as many as I have found more than 12 verses referring to inner divinity, as many as 12 or 13 slokas referring to the inner divinity. So Narayana is the divine soul, always present in our humanity. Always present in our humanity. And who is Narayana? The secret guide, friend, helper of the human being, the Lord who abides within the heart of creators of the Gita. Ishvara sarva bhutanang hriddese arjuna tishtati. 61 verse number chapter 18. Not only in verse number 61 of chapter 18, Krishna has referred to himself as the inner divinity in as many as more than 12 verses, which I have already mentioned. So the Lord who abides within the heart of creators of the Gita. And when we didn't ask, but it is veiled. He is veiled. He is veiled by ignorance. But that divinity is eternally present within us. It is veiled by our ignorance. Then Maharishi says, when we didn't ask, the veil of that secret sanctuary is withdrawn, and man speaks face to face with God, hears the divine voice, receives the divine light, acts in the divine power. Then becomes possible the supreme uplifting of the embodied human conscious being into the unborn and eternal. In the language of Gita, Madbhavam Agata. So it is the supreme uplifting of the Dehi, so conscious embodied self. When So Narayana is the divine soul, always present in man. And who is Narayana? The secret guide, friend, and helper of humanity. And when the veil within is withdrawn, when the veil within is withdrawn, veil of ignorance, veil of ignorance is withdrawn, then what happens? Then man speaks face to face with God. God within hears and receives the divine voice and the divine light, acts in the divine power, and then it is possible the supreme uplifting of the embodied conscious being into the unborn and eternal, which Gita has spoken about as the Madhvavam Agata in verse number 10 of chapter 4. Verse number 10 of the chapter 4. So supreme uplifting of the conscious embodied soul. When? When the veil is withdrawn. So Narayana is eternally present within us. And Gita has referred to this conception as many as more than 12 verses. 12 verses in different chapters. So it is the Vaishnava form of Vedantism, the double figure of Nara and Narayana. Then, and Maharishi says, this is, Gita has spoken, this, the eternal companionship of the Nara and Narayana, according to Gita, it is the Uttamam Rahasyam of the verse number 3, chapter number 4, that he becomes capable of that dwelling in God. He means the Jiva. And when the veil is withdrawn, when the veil is withdrawn, veil of ignorance is withdrawn, because divine is always present within. So then he becomes capable of that dwelling in God and giving up of his whole consciousness into the divine, which the Gita upholds as the base or highest secret of things, Uttamam Rahasyam. Verse number 3, chapter number 4. So, according to Gita, is the living in God. When living in God, when the veil between Nara and Narayana is withdrawn, because Narayana is always and eternally present within us. And then Maharishi has spoken about two aspects of the avatara. One, he calls as the manifest avatara, and the other one is the eternal avatara. So what is the manifest avatara and what is eternal avatara? Then Maharishi says, when this eternal divine consciousness means the Narayana, the divinity, always present within man. So, and this eternal divine consciousness, and what is its characteristics? It is always present in every human being. This God in man takes possession of what and how? They takes possession partly or wholly, either partly or wholly. And why he is referring to partly and wholly? Because Chaitanya was, according to Maharishi, Chaitanya was a part, Chaitanya's consciousness is partly possessed by the divine consciousness. So when this eternal divine consciousness, always present in every human being, this God in man takes possession partly or wholly of the human consciousness and becomes in visible shape what he becomes, and becomes the guide, teacher, leader of the world in visible shape. Who? This eternal divine consciousness within man. This God in man, when takes possession of the human consciousness, either partly or wholly, and becomes the guide, teacher, and leader of the world in visible shape, but not as those who, living in their humanity, yet feel something of the power or light or love of the divine genosis informing and controlling them. It is not spoken about those who are living in their humanity, but yet feels something of the power or light or life or divine genosis informing or conducting them or influencing them. But out of that divine genosis itself, divine genosis means that divine pragya. So out of that divine genosis itself, direct from its central force and plenitude, then we have the manifest avatar. So what is the condition of the manifest avatar? So it is Maharishi's conception that this eternal divinity within human being, it is perhaps the noble conception of Sri Aurobindo. Who is manifest avatar? Eternal divine consciousness always present in man, taking possession of the human consciousness, taking possession of the human consciousness, becomes the guide, teacher, leader of the world in visible form, out of the divine genosis and direct from its central force and plenitude. Then we have the manifest avatar. But it is not spoken about them who are living in their humanity yet feel something of the power or light or love of the divine genosis, are influencing them, are enlightening them, are informing them, are conducting them. But when this eternal divine consciousness, always present in man, taking possession of the human consciousness, becomes the guide, teacher, leader of the world in visible form, out of the divine genosis, and direct from its central force and plenitude, then we have the manifest avatar. And what is the eternal avatar? I am concluding. So, and what is the eternal avatar? This is the manifest avatar. What is the eternal avatar? The inner divinity is the eternal avatar in man. So this is Maharishi's very noble conception. One is manifest avatar, other one is the eternal avatar. And the inner divinity is the eternal avatar in man. The human manifestation is its signs and develop in the external world. Then what is the conception of the Gita? So far is the conception of avatarhood is concerned. Then Maharishi says, the Gita accepts the human avatarhood. Gita accepts the human avatarhood. And what is the human avatarhood? The constant manifestation of the divine in humanity. Where divine has spoken those things? In verse number 4. In verse number 4, from verse number 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and 10. So, the Gita accepts the human avatarhood, the the constant manifestation of divine in humanity. When he, the eternal unborn, assumes by his Maya, by the power of the infinite consciousness, to clothe itself apparently in finite forms, the condition of becoming, which we call birth, by the power of his Maya. So, sixth thing, the Gita accepts the human avatarhood, the constant manifestation of the divine in humanity, the eternal unborn assumes by his Maya, and what is the, and that is to say, and what is the meaning of the Maya? Maya is nothing but the power of the infinite consciousness, clothing itself. And what is that power? Clothing itself apparently in finite forms, and that is the condition of becoming the bird. So this is the human avatarhood as per the Gita. But then Maharishi says, but it is not this upon which stress is laid. Maharishi has categorically emphasized, though Gita has accepted, though Gita accepts human avatarhood, Maharishi has categorically emphasized that, but it is not this upon which stress is laid. Why? But on what stress is laid? Maharishi says, on the transcendent. on the transcendent, the cosmic, and the internal divine. So according to Maharishi, though Gita accepts human avatarhood, according to Maharishi, it is not this upon which stress is laid. Stress is laid on the transcendent, the cosmic, and the internal divine. It is on the source of all things and master of all, and on the Godhead secret in man. How we can how we so what is his argument? Maharishi has said it is this internal divine. I have already mentioned almost 12 verses referring to the internal divinity out of the whole 700 slokas of the Gita. So it is this internal divinity who is mean when the Gita speaks of the doer of violent asuric austerities troubling the God within, or of the sin of those who despise the divine laws in the human body, and or of the same Godhead destroying our ignorance by the blazing lamp of knowledge. So all these verses Gita has spoken about or referring to the inner divinity. So I am concluding. So my concluding remark, so according to Maharishi, Avatar, we are all descent of the infinite, but an entire existence is the manifestation of God, but this is a veiled manifestation, and there is also the gradation in this manifestation. The Parabhav, the supreme being, is called the Parabhav, then the conscious embodied self, which is called Dehi, then the special manifestation of power and magnitude of knowledge, love of the divine, which is called Vibhuti, and then the Tavatara. Then Maharishi has spoken about the inner divinity, and he has referred to as the eternal avatara. And according to Maharishi, this eternal divine, always present in humanity, takes possession of the human consciousness. And though Gita has accepts the human avatarahood, but stress is not laid on this human avatarahood. Stress is laid on the transcendent, the cosmic, and the internal divine. So, and Gita has refers to this inner divinity as many as 12 verses of the Gita. So, with this, with this, let me conclude here. Namaskar and thanks and my gratitude to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ji, Diganta Biswa Sarma Ji. Thank you very much for giving a elegant presentation to us. Diganta Biswa Sarma Ji, a well-known scholar in Gita Shastra and all the works of Sri Aurobindo. Anyone easily can understand his caliber by listening his speech. So he can influence more people, and matter is very vast and more, but time is very short. So we are very fortunate to receive this type of valuable points. Digant Vishwa Sharma ji introduced us many valuable distinct quotations which were told by Sri Krishna. These points always be remembered in our mind. So he explained about avatara, what difference between avatara and vibhuti, and narayana and nara. These are very valuable points in the philosophy. Karma, narayana, nara, vibhuti. These are very lot of worthy points. He explained it as, I am very thankful to you, Digant Vishwa Sharma ji. And now the second presenter, the great speaker, famous speaker, Gitanjali Madam. Gitanjali Madam is a spiritual seeker with a deep interest in Indian spirituality. And I would like to invite Gitanjali Madam to give her presentation. Madam, welcome to the dais.